Hey Garth, it's good to see you.
Jason, welcome back after an amazing 3 weeks of The Power of Mattering with Zach
Oh,
Mercurio.
what a killer! I mean
Ah,
that I don't
just
know how
awesome.
you get better, but we might actually have opportunities to get better here in this next. It's not even a triad. This one's so good. It's what do you call four episodes?
A
Quattro?
quad,
A
quattro,
quad. We got a quattro
quattro.
coming up. Quattro.
Yeah,
Before we get to the quattro or even introducing that, I got a
yeah,
question for you, Garth. Now,
yep.
when I say, tell me a memorable smell, what comes to mind?
A memorable smell. Well, I'll leave tequila out of it, but honestly, a memorable smell, and this is going to sound so bad, but it's my kids' hockey gear.
Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
like if they don't play hockey for a couple of weeks, it's like the stuff is stored down in the basement. You come to it, and it's like, oh yeah, all of a sudden, it's like, smell is the strongest trigger for memory.
Yeah. Do you think like 15 years from now, when your kids are gone and you smell hockey gear, it'll take you back to seeing your
Oh
kids play
yeah,
hockey? Yeah, right.
yeah, because I'm so proud of these guys, and I love watching them play hockey because I never played hockey. I
Yeah,
can hardly skate.
yeah, yeah. I'm the same. I'm the
Yeah.
same.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, I've never played
Okay.
hockey, and I can hardly skate. We're
Yeah.
we're brothers in that way, and my kids.
One of the many ways.
we
One of the
should
many ways. What
we
about?
should go we should go do karaoke and then go for a skate. That'd be just.
Let's do it. Jason, do you have like a memorable
I
smell?
do. I do. I worked at KFC through some of my high school years, and the
Oh
smell
wow.
of raw poultry is just like deep in me, and I can barely enjoy cooking chicken because it was just
Oh,
so. It was so. And like to this day, I smell it. It takes me back to the back room in KFC, and I like it's just so visceral, and I think that's
yes.
and that's the point of this podcast, isn't it? Like we
Smell-o-vision.
it's so today we are discussing not one, two books by George Couros. Garth, why don't you intro the books? Let our listeners know what's coming their way.
Sure. Well, the reason, listeners, that we're talking about smell is because there's a subchapter within George's book, Forward Together, which is called "Don't Get Used to the Smell." And this
Hmm.
is just one example of the provocation, both in in Forward Together, and Innovator's Mindset, the two books that we talk about, that really provoke you, right? They provoke you in ways that are positive and optimistic, but still, he is opinionated. He's trying to make you think differently about the purpose of education, what the outcomes should be, how it's been changing over the last 10, 15 years, and why we need to pay attention to it.
There you have it. So over
How
the
does
next, that was perfect. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to intro the two books. We are going to talk about smell. And then
yeah,
the next two episodes are going to be George coming right at you. First one is
yeah,
going to be Innovator Mindset. And the second one is his newest book, Forward Together.
yeah,
And can hardly wait for you to hear his opinions, his
yeah.
provocations.
It's going to be
He is
great.
going to leave you with something to think about.
All right, Jason, let's get to it.
Yeah,
Thanks,
enjoy the show.
listeners. Enjoy the show.
Lassoing leadership, sharp and true. Beard's Book Club got wisdom for you. Turn the pages, let the stories flow. Unpacking lessons as we grow.
Jason Rogers, one of my favorite times in my week is spending time with you and our listeners. Welcome to Lassoing Leadership Season 3, Beard's Book Club. Jason, how you doing, my man?
Garth, we're back in the studio. You know, I'm happiest when I'm in this studio with you, and it's good to
Aw,
be back, and and talking about some really interesting books coming up. And this is the
yeah,
first of a series of, I think, some really compelling conversations we're going to share with our audience, and I can hardly wait. Yeah, let's get into it.
yeah.
Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about where we're going in the next few episodes here with Pod?
Well, Jason, people have heard about our podcast, and
Apparently,
and
yeah.
some people want to actually get on it, which is amazing. And one is an old friend of yours, George Couros, and he
Mhm.
wrote a book. He's written several books actually, but we over the summer um, talked to him about Innovator's Mindset. Now, I'm not sure what year that was published in, but it is still incredibly relevant. So we're going to spend some time on that one. But he's also just released a book, and you and I were given access to it before it was released. So we get to tell our listeners a little bit about that. It's both are fantastic reads. So I'm really looking forward to getting deep into 2 books over the next 4 weeks with our listeners.
Yeah, I don't want to hype this up too much, but I think our listeners are really going to enjoy George's energy on the podcast. I mean, both of them bring a different and unique flavor, but George is truly at his core an entertainer. He is a storyteller and an entertainer, and he's always been like that. It's we're in for a treat on these pods.
Yeah, and he writes the same way he speaks, which is with a lot of energy and emphasis. He's a great storyteller. He's highly opinionated, which I think is great because he is an educator. He started teaching computer science, moved through into administration, and he has some great advice. So as he was moving through, he wrote the book Innovator's Mindset to talk about the power of mindset shifts to enhance students' future readiness. And his most recent book, Forward Together, is about leading that shift, which I think is great. So Jason, listen, let's jump in. You know George personally, so why don't you tell us a little bit about how you know George?
Yeah, sometimes these personal connections do help out a bit, Garth. And I got to know George when we were both studying university in Saskatchewan in the 90s. We were doing an education degree. And, he and I played basketball together during that time in rec leagues and, chummed about a lot. And we had a lot of similar opinions and ideas. And we really got on really well. And then, lost track of George, as so often happens after university. Would bump into him at local concerts or conventions or different places. And we always found a way to rekindle our friendship. And when we started to do this Beards book club idea, he was literally one of the first people I thought to reach out to. And I found him again. He's actually living south of the border now, enjoying, Florida with his family. And it's one of those things, Garth, where it's like, I think our listeners will hear it on the podcast, but when you're friends with somebody and you lose touch with them, sometimes it's like riding a bike. You just get right back on that bike and that friendship exists. So I think some of that, I think you're going to hear that in the podcast as we move ahead too.
Yeah. And based on what I've known from talking with him, on the pod, but also most recently with his new book, he's very affable. He's very you feel like you know him because he shares so much of his own experience. Vulnerability is a real sort of theme throughout these 2 books. But Jason, Innovator's Mindset, why is it still relevant even though it was written about 10 years ago?
Well, I think George struck a bit of genius here when he wrote the book. So those listeners who don't have it, you should go pick it up. It's one of these books where you can, read it relatively quickly, but it's going to stick with you. And I think this notion, this provocation of innovation is where, George really lives. And he says, it's not about innovation for innovation's sake. It's about, it's a mindset. It's a way of improving education. Truly, it is about relationships. It's not even about technology. It's about how do we compel people to do what's right and best practice in education? How do we compel people to seek out continuous change and improvement? And how do we compel people to think about relationships before we think about change? And, if any of those things kind of strike a chord with you, I think Innovative Mindset is really worth leaning into because it challenges that notion that innovation happens in Silicon Valley, happens at Apple, Google, Amazon, happens at SpaceX. I think George is really, really challenging us to think about it differently. That's just tip of the iceberg type stuff here, Garth. What about you? What do you take? You're kind of the Canadian innovator from the start. I mean, that when you read it, what does it say to you?
Thanks, Jason.
You're welcome.
When I read it, I was actually I felt very validated, because there's a lot of us who are talking the same language, and it's great to put theory. To have theory to support it. And that's where George's strength is in this book. So this is a book where he defines innovation as a way of thinking, applying thinking to create better learning opportunities. So he defines 8 characteristics of the innovator's mindset for educators. And they'll sound very familiar to our listeners, very familiar. Empathetic, problem solvers, problem finders, risk takers. They've got to be networked, observant. They've got to be creators, resilient, and reflective. These are things that some people would say, that's not the role of schools. schools shouldn't be, teaching our kids about empathy or teaching our kids about risk. They need to stick to the 3 R's: arithmetic, reading, and writing. And so for me, where this book goes next level is there's 3 chapters that as a head of school really spoke to me. One was chapter 5, where it talks about the chapter 5 title is Learn, Lead, Innovate.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 10, Less is More. And chapter 12, Create Meaningful Learning Experiences for Educators. So it's in these 3 chapters, I believe, there's a strong force of innovation lies. It's in our systems and it's in our structures of the learning organization. So if you want to free teachers' mindsets, you have to free their time. You have to free their space. You've got to allow them to think differently about when PD happens, how it happens, not just going on to social media to get their PD, which was of a time, but build these systems into our daily lived experience. So in that way, the innovator's mindset is still really meaningful and still really relevant. So this book is a great read for anyone, I think, in education. It takes the broad perspective that it offers, but also it gets you down into the weeds of how and why you want to do this.
I mean, from a leader's perspective, Garth, you hit on a couple things that do stick with me in the innovator's mindset. One is, George, if you find him on social media or find him wherever he lives, he's everywhere, talks about empowerment over control nonstop. Really, how do we empower people, students, teachers, parents, anybody in our communities to be learners? And I think that's the second part is like teachers and leaders as learners is a true tenet of his. And I think that leads to like purposeful innovation and useful innovation, not innovation for innovation's sake. And I think too often, you hear that word innovation and you think, oh my goodness, we're about to break things here. And you know what I mean? And I think I don't think it's about breaking things. I think it's about, truly about failure. It's about risk and it's about psychological safety. And I think George really does start with that idea of psychological safety. So he's captured it in this innovator's mindset. I really do encourage people to pick it up.
Yeah, and our interview with him about innovator's mindset, you'll see how opinionated he is, and he puts these provocations out there not to piss people off or not to polarize the discussion, but to get us to think about what we want to do and what is the purpose of education, which I really, really appreciate.
Yeah, I think, and George would appreciate this, but I actually had the opportunity to have George come and speak at Rundle about 10 or 11 years ago. And, if this for all leaders out there, if you want somebody who can speak to parents as easily as he can speak to teachers as leaders, call George in. You are not going to be disappointed. He is an internationally renowned keynote speaker. And it's because of his style of speaking, his provocations that make him so compelling. And I think, what I remember from his presentation was obviously he was talking about change in the world. He was talking about Twitter at that time and talking about how our digital footprint is, shapeable and moldable. So many takeaways from over a decade ago, but what really struck me in his presentation was humanity. He was there building relationships with everybody in the room. I've seen him do it in independent circles and public schools just the same. And the real climax of his presentation was about him losing his dog and his relationship with his dog. And what he was trying to bring home to us was emotions are really important when we talk about change and change management and how we're feeling and the relationships we hold. And so, I just think if you have the opportunity to hear George speak or bring him into your school, it is definitely worth the investment. You're going to have a bunch of inspired and motivated people who have heard George speak. So huge kudos to George and a huge endorsement there as well.
Yeah. Let's talk about his second book, because we're going to go with Innovator's Mindset next week. And then we're going to talk about his latest book, which is called Forward Together. And in this book, as you're saying, Jason, he gets really vulnerable. He tells stories, but he also pulls in other stories as well. But there's 3 main things I would point out to the purpose of the book, like why people would want to read Forward Together. The key question that guides the book is the how. How do we move people forward together? Mm-hmm. And he does this by breaking the book into 2 parts. 6 principles, 6 perspectives, which I really, really liked. And each one is full of story after story after story to allow you, the reader, to really connect with what he is suggesting. Now, he is opinionated, but actually does a really good job of not giving you his opinion on these different perspectives. He's just saying, here's a story that might provoke you to think differently. So the second thing I'll say is that this book is really about challenging leaders to change the conditions that allow people to change themselves. And he talks about how teachers aren't scared of change, right? We need to create the conditions to allow change to happen. And so he talks a lot about professional development. He gets into artificial intelligence, all those types of things. But he also does a great job, and this is point number 3, he also does a great job of tempering all of this by saying we still need the foundation of a good education. It's not like we're going to go and experiment and test only. Innovation requires that foundation. So reading, writing should be the floor, not the ceiling. It should be the floor. Schools can do more. We are more enabled than ever through the use of technology. And he's a technology sort of evangelist in a lot of ways because of his background in computer science. But, he's saying that technology is going to allow us to do more, but we need that foundation. So those are the 3 main points that I would bring up about Forward Together.
It's interesting, thinking about what we talked about in our last podcast, where we were talking about, you and I were having a conversation about AI being the infrastructure, not the, rocket ship. And I think that's part of what we're seeing come through, or maybe the aspiration that George is putting forward with respect to, when you're talking about the floor being the foundational elements, and how do we take these tools, some of them seen as being very, very innovative, and move us forward. But Garth, you said something a minute ago, and I want you to put on your head of school hat for a minute.
Not my Buffalo Bills hat.
Yeah, that's okay. And let's explore it for a second. You said something that, like, teachers are not afraid of change, and I think that's true. Like, I actually believe that to be true. But we do have a perception, particularly from a head of school lens, that teachers, parents, and students may be resistant to change. You hear that all of the time. So why is there a dichotomy? Why is there a paradox there? Is that people aren't afraid of change, but we perceive them as being resistant to change? And how do you overcome that from a leadership perspective? How do you think about that?
Well, I think about it through the lens of this book, because it's top of mind, right? So it shapes my thinking. But George would tell you that you have to create the conditions where you can write compelling stories together. So he shares stories about when he was vice principal at a school, he actually invited families, students and parents, into professional development. So imagine that you are calling as head of school, you're calling your teachers in. Hey, we're going to have an hour of professional development. We're going to do a half day of professional development. And by the way, we're joined by the Burjesh family over here, or we're joined by the, another family over here who have their kids, all that stuff. I'd never heard of that before. I read about it in Forward Together. It's got me thinking, how do we actually create stories together? How do we bring people into the inside of what I'm thinking, inside of what our senior admin team is thinking? How do we bring people inside of what the school is thinking, so that we can create, clear communications, understandings? Like, what are our shared assumptions about our faculty? What are the shared assumptions about our families? We all think that all students can learn. All students want to learn, right? And we need to be coming together to create how we think they can learn most optimally.
Right.
So for me, that was really great. But I would also say this: there's a great, how with generative AI, say, teachers won't be replaced by your job won't be replaced by AI.
Yeah.
But you might be replaced by someone using AI really, really well.
Yeah.
So in the book, George reframes this, and this is something I'm really looking forward to talking about. So he reframes it. He says, technology won't replace teachers, but teachers using technology can be transformative.
Right.
And this book is all about switching your mindset, right? Not that generative AI is something to be feared or worried about, but rather, how do we make it transformational? So I really, really liked that part of it. Yeah. So that's how it shaped my thinking.
That is really, really interesting. And I think, that might be a challenge for leaders as we, kind of wrap up this podcast, Garth, is like, how do we intentionally in the weeks ahead bring people further into the conversations about shaping change in our organizations, right? Yeah. Like, what are the ways, whether it's, inviting parents into PD. I love that idea. Or inviting staff and faculty into meetings, or providing those openings. I think it's a great challenge.
Yeah, so I'll say two things about this. Because some of the titles of the different chapters and sections of the book are just amazing. George does a great job. One of them is don't forget about the smell, or don't let the smell bother you, or something like that. I don't have it in front of me, but it's like, don't forget how bad it smells. Anyway, he tells this story about how he was working he had this horrible job. And, he went and they're like, you got to do this job. It's in that room. And he walks to the room and it smells horrible. And he works at this job all day. And he comes out and is like, I quit. I can't do this. They're like, wow, you lasted longer than anybody else. But he uses that story as a springboard to be like, don't get so immersed in your own culture. Don't get so immersed in the way of doing things.
Yeah, school, that's a great
right?
point.
Because it starts to smell like, you lose the sense of like how it smells. You got to get out. You've got to always be looking outside. Go to other schools, talk to other people. This is why like the CASE National Leaders Conference is like really valuable. Like peer review teams, like all of these different things that CASE does to remind us there are other schools doing things differently. Don't let the smell like leave you. Right?
Amazing.
Anyway, it's really provocative. Not saying that our school smells bad, but it's just one of those things, right? You've got to always kind of look for a way to reimagine, reassess, level up, those types of things. Continuous improvement, right?
Oh, I love that.
And then the other thing that I would say, and you are an expert at this, Jason, you do this so well. We've talked about this last time too, in terms of your resolutions, but he says that listening can increase the speed of change. Right? Not listening and responding and saying, oh, I've listened to that and you're right and we should do that. Listening effectively can increase the speed of change, which reminds us of something which I hold near and dear to my heart, which is that schools change the speed of trust. So too does change, right? Like you've got to build that trust, and that's what we started talking about with George. Like you've got to build connections all the time.
And before we wrap on this, we talked about our wish list of people we want to have on the podcast. And I didn't bring up Brene Brown because it's just not realistic. I think we have a better chance of getting Sudeikis than we do Brene Brown on this podcast. But I was recently listening to her new book. And the title is escaping me right now, but it is so good. And she was talking about her own podcast a lot on that book. Feels like a podcast promotion. It's an extraordinary book. But a podcast promotion at the same time. And she said her podcast has been labeled by critics as a pausecast. And the reason they say pausecast is because if you do listen to Brene Brown, and her podcast is great, there are long pauses between some of her questions and the responses. And she said it's because she is so actively listening that she is not thinking about her next question. She is just taking it in. It takes time to formulate. And she's talked to her producers and said, do not cut those pauses out, because it's just a demonstration of deep listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Strong ground, the lessons of daring leadership, the tenacity of paradox, and the wisdom of the human spirit. Brene Brown's newest book. Jason, thank you.
Have you read it? I recommend it. No. I recommend it. Get in there, give it a listen, give it a read. It's amazing.
All right. Thanks for the reco. But we recommend Innovator's Mindset.
It's true.
And we recommend moving forward. Over the next 4 weeks, you'll hear two different conversations with George. One about Innovator's Mindset, where we focus on that book and why it's still so relevant, still so important. And then his next one, Moving Forward, which really goes into the how and the why, and really talks about the leadership through storytelling, which I think all of our listeners will enjoy.
All right. Enjoy this coming episodes. And as always, Garth, thanks for taking a little time today.
Yeah. Enjoy. Thanks, listeners. Thanks, Jason. Great to see you.
Until next time, keep leading and reading the Lasso way. Thanks, Garth.
Bye.
Grab your coffee, grab your seat. It's time to learn, it's time to meet. Garth and Jason setting the tone. Leadership lessons to take back home. Lassoing leadership, sharp and true. Beard's Book Club got wisdom for you. Turn the pages. let the stories flow, unpacking lessons as we grow. Keep leading the lasso way. Together we'll grow stronger every day. So plug in your headphones and let's start the show. With lessons from Ted, we'll learn and grow. Lassoing leadership, sharp and true. Beard's Book Club got wisdom for you. Turn the pages, let the stories flow, unpacking lessons as we grow. Keep leading the lasso way. Together we'll grow stronger every day. So plug in your headphones and let's start the show. With lessons from Ted, we'll learn and grow. Lassoing leadership, sharp and true. Beard's Book Club got wisdom for you. Turn the pages, let the stories flow, unpacking lessons as we grow. Unpacking lessons as we